Hey guys, I'm here at Technology Credit Union and I'm right outside in my car. And a couple of days, actually yesterday, I came in and received fairly egregious customer service. And I want to talk about, basically, a couple of different things. Because when I posted the video on my YouTube account, Google, which owns YouTube, sent me a privacy complaint. And they've given me 24 hours to modify the video, or it will be taken down or edited. And this is the first time I've seen this kind of a situation before, or received like this kind of a complaint. And so what Google does, it allows you to use a video editor to blur out the faces of anyone involved. And in this case, the employee was wearing a mask. But again, I went ahead and used the editing function to blur out any faces in the video. And, what we want to talk about here is, the privacy and what's going on with privacy in America. Because the right to privacy obviously is not absolute. It's not even mentioned in the Constitution of the United States. And so it's something that I believe a Supreme Court justice, essentially inferred from the shadows and penumbras of, the four corners of the document. In other words, they kind of made it up. And, that's what we talk about when we say the Constitution is an evolving document. It's not set in stone. And so even something like privacy that's not even mentioned anywhere is now part and parcel of the rights that American citizens have. Now, what is, interesting is that most people don't realize that this right to privacy within the Bill of Rights is actually applicable to the government. It's not applicable to private corporations. And so you can't bring a constitutional claim for a privacy violation against, Google or against, some sort of, that's an interesting question, right? You can't really bring one against, this store right here, a mattress, right? Or Target or anybody else. And so those laws are all under either state statutes or federal statutes or some kind of other law that's in addition to the Constitution. And, this is really interesting because if corporations and businesses and banks and credit unions can take down videos of employees performing poorly, and these are customer-facing employees, if they can do that, then you can see how we have a lot of issues in this country in terms of uncovering, not necessarily the next Enron or the next, potential bankruptcy and so on, but also just trying to maintain honesty among, just different entities, whether it's the government or whether it's corporations or whether it's just a small business. And, you've got a situation where if corporations are able to take down any sort of negative review or negative, or a negative video of their employees, you can see that, number one, it makes it really hard for the board of directors or the executives to uncover not just wrongdoing, but just a general malaise of improper conduct or negligent conduct. And you can also see that without a video, that's publicized, you're sort of defanging the citizen journalism movement, which is really what spurred all these things that like the blogging and videos and, what people used to call citizen journalism. And, in other words, that the community is run by individuals and, as a result, these individuals will be in positions where, they can keep checks and balances on improper behavior. Now, that gentleman just walked by me. I put the camera down even though he had a mask. Now, again, the right to privacy is based on a reasonable expectation of privacy. And, so had I gone ahead and, taken a video, he's outside, he's in public. And, is that something where he deserves a right to privacy? And the fact of the matter is, in most cases, right, you can either blur his face out, which quite frankly seems like a reasonable compromise, or you can create a situation where, you don't mention that person's name. But again, the idea is that the right to privacy has to be based on a reasonable expectation, which puts companies like Technology Credit Union, at an interesting sort of vantage point, because at an interesting intersection. Because on the one hand, it's a federal charter, right? It's not a business in the sense that, you would expect, just like some sort of, a product-driven consumer company. It's chartered by the federal government because it's a quasi-bank. In other words, it's a combination of government and private corporation. So anytime you're talking about privacy or anything else, what you're really talking about is this idea that, each situation depends on the facts of the case, which is why you have so many different outcomes, despite the law being relatively, the same. And, you can see that the reason lawyers say it depends is because it really does depend on the facts of the case. And that's why in many cases, right, you've got a backlash, in terms of drug laws. You've got a backlash where, the federal government thought that some judges were too lenient, and as a result, enacted mandatory sentencing guidelines where if the jury finds you guilty of X statute, whether it's a certain amount of drug possession, the judge has no choice but to mandate a minimum level of jail time. And of course, that's one of the reasons why jails are so costly in America. It's just and so expensive, and why that also has led to powerful police unions and powerful prison guard lobbies, and quite frankly, just powerful government employees in states where government employees are allowed to unionize, and therefore create a process where they have the same lawyers, they have a massive lobby group, a powerful lobby group, and again, can use those lobby groups in order to take down negative information. And when I talk about citizen journalism, Susan Bassi, Bassi, comes to mind because, she's got a lot of interesting videos. She's really on a rampage against this family court private judging option in family court, in divorce court. And I don't necessarily agree with everything she says, but you have to understand that the whole idea of citizen journalism is that or even national journalism, is that no one person has all the answers. So we're constantly trying to put together this network, this web of information that eventually allows us to figure out what the solution could be. And in order to figure out the solution, we first have to figure out the problem. You can't do that if people like Susan Bassi are harassed when they go to court and they try to videotape employees in court. And Susan Bassi alleges that when she tried to do that, somebody actually either broke her hand or damaged her hand when they took away her phone. And Bassi is an older woman, so this is, again, it shows you that there really are a lot of different sets of conduct and a lot of different approaches to privacy. But at the end of the day, you can see in a state like California, where the government has unionized, you can see that they can also use that power to pass laws protecting their own privacy, in some cases above others, above just you and me, non-government workers. And, you can probably try to gauge how your state, how open and transparent your state is, just by trying to figure out how easy it is to get access to police discipline records. And in the state of California, it's really difficult. You got to go and get, a lot of different, you have to actually file a motion, from what I understand. And it's not something where you can just do it's just difficult, right? In some cases, right, you should be able to do what's called a public records request. But the problem with that is that the agency has the option of redacting what they consider to be confidential information. So right away, right, you have so much discretion all over, right? So that kind of conflicts with the idea that journalism was supposed to be a check and balance on non-transparent behavior. The idea being that the less transparency we have in society, at least where, people do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy, at least, we're just sort of dependent on expensive lawyers and judges in order to basically keep people honest. And, in opposition to that is this idea of the EU, of the right to be forgotten. And the right to be forgotten is, makes a lot of sense. If you have an ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend who's putting pictures of you online and, those are not taken down immediately using image recognition software, you've got a situation where people really do should have the option of creating a situation where their names are redacted, so they don't have to go through, a whole process of, trying to change their name and so on and so forth. It's just, it's just so they can find a job, because their employer, because when they apply for a job, their employer Googles their name, and suddenly, there's all this negative information that's actually false. So you can see why, you've got a lot of countervailing sort of ideas, right? And there's always this balance, and that's why there's always this role for lawyers and regulatory agencies to play. But in this case, right, the fact that, you've got a situation where, you've got, somebody who is supposed to be, essentially supposed to be in a position where, they're really running a quasi-bank, right? And so you're using, in some case, government resources, right? Even if it's just the Federal Reserve's regulatory processes as a backstop, or just the FDIC. And, you go back and forth between this idea of transparency and privacy. And, Google, I think, is trying to be a good corporate citizen, but at the same time, think about how does Google make money? It's advertising. And so Facebook, Google, all these companies, they didn't become trillion-dollar or close to trillion-dollar companies by allowing a system in place that allowed people, individuals that are not paying money, that are just interested in just honesty and transparency. If you've got somebody who's paying, who's buying a lot of ads on Google and YouTube and so on, and if it's Facebook on Instagram, and you can see how convenient it would be to create a situation where you essentially eliminate or use privacy laws in order to eliminate negative information. And in doing so, not only shield, say, government workers from accountability, but just corporations. And so when you think about advertising, you have to think about this idea that marketing is basically a situation where you're paying for an image. And what do you do when people try to use the privacy laws in order to create a situation where the image doesn't actually match up to reality? How do you deal with that situation, especially when you have individuals involved? And what people really, and the answer to that, I think, is fairly straightforward, right? You have to have some level of transparency, even when individuals are involved in customer-facing services, because if you don't, then the advertisers are nothing more than propagandists. And eventually people are turned off by any system that allows essentially fake news, or that allows people to buy a reputation that's undeserved. And so that's what we're talking about here. And this is the branch that, and I'm interested in seeing that now that I've actually, revised the video, right? And, put it up on YouTube, and I've tried to respond to the to the privacy complaint by removing any names. I'm interested in seeing what will happen. And I'm also interested in, sort of like I said, putting a spotlight on these companies. You've got, this is the person involved, and who's the manager. And, and so this is really an interesting situation where, you've got to try to figure out that balance. And, what's interesting in this case, right, is it's a glass door. Anybody can come in and see. And so part of the reason I'm taking this video is, just to show, hopefully, whoever is going to review the video, that's been flagged for a privacy violation or a secondary review. I'm going to show how, like I said, that there is really no reasonable expectation of privacy, within this, customer-facing environment. So let's try that out. Give me a second here, and we'll go ahead and see what we can do here. And oops, got that. And just to make sure we're not confusing this with other technology credit unions, it seems to me that this is the one on Bascom Avenue in San Jose, on the San Jose Campbell border. And I want to sort of like show something real quick here. How's it going? Your business cards are right here? Yeah. Cool. So anybody can just come in and take one. Thank you. So again, there's always that idea that even if you're in a lobby, you can open the door and you can actually see everyone here. And so the question really becomes, right, since did you have the right in this kind of an environment to essentially take down videos, of alleged misconduct? Or are we in a position where, we just have to sort of deal with the idea that we're going to have to litigate everything? And if we're going to deal with this idea that the lawyer, we're going to have to get the lawyers involved in every little transaction, well, number one, the lawyers aren't cheap, and they're not necessarily honest, or more honest than anybody else, especially not a citizen journalist. And so if you think about what's happened with fake news, you can also argue that one of the reasons that we're having so many problems, and that people like Donald Trump are so lionized by the Americans, despite some obvious flaws, is because of this idea that you have people that are authentic, that they, and this is really not necessarily a great example because Donald Trump obviously has a lot of lawyers involved as well. But you can see how that kind of a system where you have to get a lawyer, or where you have to get a lawyer to fight off some other lawyer, and in order to create a system of transparency that provides some level of honesty. You can see how in that situation, if you're trying to break into a political system as an outsider, you can see very quickly that why it was either Ross Perot, who was an outsider, who tried to, break apart that two-party system when I was growing up. And you can see why Donald Trump, again, another billionaire, was the outsider who managed to succeed. Because this is a society that we're in now, where, you've got trillion-dollar advertising / marketing companies, a lot of which, receive political advertisements, a lot of money from advertisers. Michael Bloomberg, the New York City mayor, who also ran for president, he's a billionaire. How did he make his money? You've got business media. So if you're going to live in a society where you have to own a media company or an army of lawyers in order to basically operate as an individual check and balance on dishonesty in either the government or the corporate world, because you're up against, very well-paid lawyers, what exactly do you do? How exactly do you expect to maintain a balance unless you have an appropriate number of citizen journalists able and willing to basically try to shed some light on what is going on in your community? And of course, newspapers became, the idea of a newspaper, it's gone away, right? It lost out to social media because of those advertising dollars, because the social media companies promised that you would have a better return on investment, that you'd be able to figure out exactly how many people were watching your video, and therefore figure out how much money you want to spend. And there's obviously problems with that. But as we're talking about these issues, right, I guess we're going to find out what's going to happen to the video that I put up there yesterday. And, given all the facts of the cases, right, all the facts of the situation, just the fact that you can see inside the technology credit union from the outside, I've blurred all the faces, and essentially it's a customer-facing business, and basically anybody can just walk in and take a business card. So I guess we'll find out what's going on. Thank you.